You woke up this morning and the yard looked quiet, the feeders hanging still, the suet cage undisturbed, maybe a cardinal somewhere in the holly bush, maybe the low gurgle of a chickadee from the maple before the coffee was even started. And if you're like me, you probably stood at the window for a minute before the day got going. I've been doing that for about 5 years now, since my wife and I moved to a house in Northern Virginia, and I started paying attention to what was happening out back before work. And for a long time, I thought what I was seeing in the morning was the yard waking up, the birds emerging from wherever they had been, starting their day, coming to the feeders for the first time. Here's what I know now that I didn't know then. The yard never went to sleep. Not exactly. By the time you stood at that window this morning, every bird in your yard had already been through something. The northern cardinals roosted in the dark and heard things. The chickadees huddled somewhere together and survived something. The mourning doves on the power line didn't just appear, they made it. What happens in your yard between the moment you turn off the lights and the moment you hear the first bird call is one of the parts of backyard birding that almost nobody talks about. Not because it isn't worth talking about, because most of it is invisible to us. Welcome. Subscribe before you leave. What you're about to learn happens every single night in your yard, and the morning will not look quite the same after. Today we're going through 6 things that happen in your yard every night. The biology, the decisions, the survival math, running on the other side of your sleep. Stay until number 6. That one I'm still working out how to talk about. Number 1. The first thing most people get wrong about their birds, where they actually sleep, not the nest. That's the thing to understand first. The nest is a nursery. Adult birds don't sleep in it outside of breeding season. Once the young are raised, the nest gets left behind. For most of the year, September through May, every bird in your yard is sleeping somewhere else entirely. For small songbirds, somewhere else breaks down into a few categories. Cavities are the most protected option. Tree holes, nest boxes, deep bark crevices, chickadees, titmice, white-breasted nuthatches, Carolina wrens. If a cavity is available, they will use it every single night. Here's the number that surprised me when I first came across it in research from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. On the coldest nights of a Northern Virginia winter, a single nest box might hold up to 12 black-capped chickadees. 12 birds in a space roughly the size of a coffee can, not by accident, by biology. Because in negative 20-degree wind chill, the difference between roosting alone and roosting with 11 other birds may be the difference between surviving until morning and not. Birds without cavity access take the other option. Dense shrubs. The thicker the interior branches, the better. Northern cardinals, 45 grams, the weight of a golf ball, roost close to the trunk, off the ground, with cover above. I have a holly bush in the back corner of my yard, between the fence and the shed. I planted it for the berries. The cardinals have been using it as their bedroom for 3 winters now. I watched them go in one evening last November, just before dark, both of them, into the same interior section, maybe 8 inches from the trunk. By 6:45, they were completely invisible. If you hadn't watched them go in, you would not have known they were there. That's the night for the birds in your yard, present, alert, surviving. In spaces so small and so still that the whole yard looks empty from your kitchen window. The question of where your birds sleep is not a small question. The where determines whether they make it to your feeder tomorrow morning. Number 2, the sleep that isn't really sleep. Here's where it gets harder to explain, because what birds call sleep is not quite what we mean by that word. Researchers at the Max Planck Institute for Ornithology have been studying sleep architecture in birds for over 2 decades. What they've found is that many species, songbirds, waterfowl, and others, are capable of something called unihemispheric slow-wave sleep. One hemisphere of the brain enters deep sleep. The other hemisphere stays partially awake. The eye connected to the awake hemisphere stays open. In practice, a mallard sleeping at the edge of a group on a cold night points outward, one eye open, watching for predators, while the other side of its brain is genuinely resting. Not a metaphor. The EEG signatures of the sleeping hemisphere and the awake hemisphere are measurably distinct. Researchers can look at the readout and tell you exactly which side of the duck's brain is asleep at any given moment. Whether this happens in backyard songbirds exactly as it does in waterfowl is still being worked out. I want to be careful with that. What we know is that birds routinely alternate which hemisphere gets deeper sleep, rotating through the night. And even deep sleep in birds looks different from deep sleep in mammals, lighter, more interruptible, with faster recovery times. What this means for the birds in your yard tonight is this. When you picture your chickadee asleep in a cavity, you might imagine something like a person in a bed, unconscious, vulnerable, checked out. That picture is almost certainly wrong. What's more likely is something closer to a watchman doing rotating shifts with himself, half resting, half listening, half sleeping, half still asking, is anything out there? That state, that vigilance that never fully turns off, runs every night, in every cavity and every shrub in every yard that has a bird in it. I'm still trying to figure out what to make of that. But it has changed something about the way I think about what the yard is doing while I'm asleep. Number 3, how they survive the cold. I want to talk about the specific biology of a chickadee on a January night in a Northern Virginia yard, because this is where the numbers start to matter. A black-capped chickadee weighs 12 grams, the weight of 2 pennies, 2 thin dimes stacked, and on a night when the temperature drops to 17 degrees Fahrenheit, that 12-gram bird has to maintain a core body temperature somewhere around 104 degrees. The math on what that costs in calories is not forgiving. Here's what the birds actually do. They don't just endure the cold. They don't just fluff their feathers and wait it out. Research from the University of Wisconsin, replicated at other labs since, tells us that chickadees enter a state called regulated hypothermia. They deliberately lower their own body temperature. On the coldest nights, a chickadee can drop its core temperature by up to 22 degrees Fahrenheit. Not because it's failing to regulate, because full regulation is too expensive. The bird runs a calculated deficit. The consequence of that, a chickadee on a hard winter night can lose up to 8% of its body weight just getting through until morning. 8% of 12 grams is less than a gram. In pure weight terms, meaningless. In survival terms, it is the margin. That gram represents the energy reserves the bird spent the daylight hours building, at feeders, in leaf litter, in bark crevices where it cached seeds earlier in the week. So here's the practical piece, and I want to say this plainly. An empty feeder at sunset, a feeder that didn't get topped off before dark, means a bird goes into a cold night with a thinner margin than it might have had. The research doesn't let us draw a hard line, but the line exists. Not every bird, not every night. But on the coldest nights of the year, the birds that found full feeders before dark and the birds that didn't are not starting the night from the same place. I check the tube feeders before dark now, when the temperature is going to drop hard. I learned that the way I've learned most things in this yard, a little late. Number 4, the part I wasn't going to include. Then I thought about it for 2 days and decided I had to. About 2.5 years ago, I installed a motion sensor floodlight on the back of my garage, security mostly, the kind that kicks on when anything crosses the sensor, a car backing in, a cat from next door, anything large enough to trigger it. I had it for a full year before I figured out that the holly bush it lit up every time the neighbor's cat came through was where my cardinals sleep. Now let's talk about the part that gets uncomfortable. And I want to frame it the right way, because I am not here to lecture you. I am the person who had a floodlight pointed at the cardinal's bedroom for 12 full months before I noticed. Artificial light at night, researchers call it ALAN, for artificial light at night, is one of the most thoroughly documented disruptors of bird biology in the current literature. Research from the University of Exeter, replicated in multiple European studies, has shown that Light exposure during roosting hours elevates stress hormones in songbirds, disrupts circadian rhythms, and in migratory species can alter the timing and direction of migration in measurable ways. For roosting birds, light at night is not neutral. It is biological noise going directly into the system. This wasn't unusual behavior on my part. This wasn't something an irresponsible bird person does. This wasn't a distant problem I'd read about in cities with light columns visible from space. It was my cardinals, my holly bush. My motion sensor going off every time a cat walked through my yard at 11 p.m., at 1 in the morning, flooding the place where two birds were trying to sleep. I moved the sensor. I angled the light downward, away from the holly, toward the pavement. Within 2 weeks, this was last February, as I'm recording this, the cardinals were back in that corner of the holly on schedule. Before dark, every night I checked. I'm not asking you to pull your floodlights off the garage. I'm asking you to walk your yard one evening at dusk and see what you're running and where it's pointed, and whether anything is roosting in the range of it. That's all I did. It took 5 minutes. I wish I had done it 2 years earlier. Number 5. What's flying over your house right now? If you're listening to this in mid-April or early May, or September and October, this one is for you specifically. Most songbirds migrate at night. The majority, wood thrushes, blackpoll warblers, white-throated sparrows, orioles. They fly their migration routes after dark, when the air is cooler and more stable, and the hawks that hunt by sight have largely gone to roost themselves. They navigate by the stars, by the Earth's magnetic field, by landmarks they read in low light with a sensitivity researchers are still working to fully quantify. The Cornell Lab of Ornithology runs a project called Birdcast, a real-time migration radar system that tracks nocturnal migration as it happens across North America. On a peak migration night in late April, the data shows something on the order of 500 million to 3 billion individual birds in the air over the United States at once, not across a week, one night. At 2:37 in the morning, in mid-April, when your feeders are still, when your chickadees are asleep in the cavity in the oak and you are asleep in your bed, there are birds above your house. Wood thrushes headed to summer breeding territory in the Appalachians, blackpoll warblers beginning a journey to the boreal forest, rose-breasted grosbeaks may be 50 feet above your roof, calling to each other in the dark, soft, species-specific contact sounds that researchers call flight calls, used partly for collision avoidance and partly just to say, "We're here. Keep moving. Pay attention to this." On peak nights in April and May, birds like these are passing over every backyard in the eastern United States. Some will land in your yard at first light. They'll spend a few hours at your feeders and be gone by mid-morning. Continuing north to a forest you will never see them reach. The yard that looks like nothing at 2 in the morning is underneath something. Something that happens whether you know about it or not, every spring and every fall, above the range of what you can see from the kitchen window. Number 6. I've saved this one for last because it has to be last. The dawn chorus. You know the sound, the burst of birdsong at first light, the yard going from silence to something almost overwhelming in what feels like a few minutes. What most people don't know is when it actually starts. The research on this has been refined in recent years by work at Cambridge and at the University of Exeter. What they found is that many species begin singing. In response to light levels the human eye cannot detect at all. An American robin starts singing at roughly 0.01 lux. A full moon produces about 0.3 lux for comparison. The robin is singing in what is, to you and me, complete darkness. 45 minutes before sunrise, in January in Northern Virginia, that's around 6:45 in the morning, the first birds have already been going for a while. By the time you open the blinds and hear what sounds like the yard coming alive, the yard has been alive for a long time. What you're walking into every single morning is already well underway. I keep coming back to this because of one specific morning. Late January, a Tuesday, temperature just above 20 degrees. The kind of morning where the heated bird bath had a thin rim of ice at the edges that hadn't melted yet. I came downstairs early, maybe 6:30, and turned on the kitchen light, still fully dark outside. I went to fill the coffee maker and glanced out the back window at the tube feeder by the maple. The Tuesday couple was already there. They've been coming to my yard for 4 winters. The chickadee pair I started thinking of as the Tuesday couple after the first winter I noticed them. Always Tuesday mornings, always the 7 to 8 a.m. window, reliable enough that I started expecting them. And there they were, in the dark, at the feeder, before the coffee was on, before the yard was visible to me, before the light was measurable to either of us. They had managed the night, whatever the night required of them, the cold, the dark, the hours of half-sleep and vigilance and waiting. They had managed all of it. And then, on the other side of everything the night was, they came back to this yard. It wasn't just that they survived. It wasn't just that the feeder was full. It wasn't just 2 birds doing what birds do without any awareness of where they are. They came back to this yard in the dark before the light was up, and they were there when I looked. I don't know what to do with that sometimes. I'm not going to tell you it means something. I'm not going to tell you it doesn't. What I can tell you is that there is something in that moment, before the yard is officially awake, when the birds have already decided to return, that I don't have great words for. It's not just a bird at a feeder. It's the end of something the bird survived, and the beginning of something it chose. The mornings I notice that are the mornings the yard feels different to me. Not bigger, exactly, just less empty. Like something is happening that I was led into by accident, and I'm trying not to make noise in case it stops. The next time you stand at the window in the morning and hear the first bird song, you'll know something about what came before it. The cardinals, invisible in the holly since 6:45. The chickadees in the cavity, 12 of them on the hardest nights, burning reserves they spent the day building at your feeder. The warblers that crossed your yard at 2 in the morning, 50 feet up, calling to each other on their way to a forest 1,000 miles north of you. By the time the yard sounds alive, it has already been alive for hours. In ways that happen without you, for reasons older than your yard and your feeders and your window. And then the birds show up anyway, on the other side of everything the night was, into the yard you're standing in. I find that worth something. I'm still working out what, exactly. But on Tuesday mornings especially, when the light is just coming up and the coffee isn't done yet and the yard is already in motion, I think about the night those birds came through and the fact that they came back to this one. Tell me in the comments. What's the first sound you hear in the morning before the yard is fully awake? And is there a particular bird that always seems to be there before you expect it? I want to hear about it. I read everyone. I'll see you in the next one.